Welcome to the deep dive. We're going way back in time for this one, folks. We're talking about the history of human innovation, all those big leaps and bounds that made us, well, us.
Sounds exciting.
It is. And we've got this great article to guide us. Human Civilization, Key Inventions and Their Impact. It's jam-packed with, the milestones of technology and how it all shapes society.
Really puts things in perspective, huh?
For sure. Have you ever thought about what the real game changers were? Not just the cool gadgets, but the stuff that really changed the whole game for humanity.
Definitely.
We're talking about everything from, the discovery of fire, and not just for warmth, it's way more interesting than that, to why salt, yeah, just plain salt, was once worth more than gold.
Wow. Okay, I'm ready to dive in.
Perfect. Let's start with fire, shall we? It's kind of a big one.
You think?
I mean, it's literally a turning point in human evolution.
Absolutely. It's easy to say, oh, fire, warmth, light, got it. But seriously, early humans were already using tools, but fire that was like hitting the on switch for everything.
Yeah. It's like the article says, fire wasn't just about staying cozy. It played a vital role in our evolution. So how did that work?
Well, think about cooking. We do it all the time now, but back then, it wasn't just about making things taste better. Cooking made foods safer to eat,
Yeah.
and easier to digest. And, get this, it unlocked a bunch more nutrients.
Interesting.
Right. The article actually suggests that this directly helped our brains develop.
Wow, I never thought of it that way.
It's pretty wild when you think about it.
So something as basic as fire had this, ripple effect through, our biology even.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about the Neolithic Revolution. When people went from roaming around to actually farming and staying put.
Huge shift, yeah.
It's basically where we see civilization start to take shape, right? For
Yeah.
most of human history, we were just wanderers chasing after food. Then, bam, agriculture happens.
Totally. We put down roots, literally.
And the article makes a really good point.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about staying in one place. This whole agriculture thing led to extra food, which had some pretty big consequences.
Oh yeah, those surpluses. Game changer. They let the population grow. Suddenly you've got people who can do specialized jobs, not just everyone hunting and gathering. And then, boom, you get trade and whole economies springing up.
And cities.
Exactly, cities.
The article focuses on Mesopotamia, home to some of the earliest cities ever, right? Uruk, Eridu. These weren't just villages. They were hubs of innovation.
Oh yeah, super innovative.
So what were some of the big things that came out of those early cities?
Well, the Sumerians, they were the folks living there, made huge progress in math, astronomy, you name it. Even their architecture was incredible. But the biggest thing they did, gotta be the invention of writing.
Writing, I mean, that's enormous. It's hard to even imagine what it would be like without it. What kind of impact did that have back then?
Total game changer. Think about it. Before writing, everything was passed on by word of mouth. Imagine trying to keep track of, all your trades or having laws without writing anything down.
My brain hurts just thinking about that.
No kidding. So writing was basically a way to keep track of everything, to make sure information didn't just disappear.
Okay, so it was practical.
Super practical, but it went deeper than that. It meant we could record history, write stories, even express complex ideas as the bedrock of so much of human culture even now.
That's so true. It's not just about keeping records. It's about how humans think and communicate. But okay, so you've got these growing cities, more people living close together. Someone's got to keep things in order.
Yeah, I need some rules.
Exactly.
Bigger populations mean more potential for, disagreements. And that's where we see written laws popping up. The big one, the Code of Hammurabi.
Ah, Hammurabi's Code. I remember that from, history class.
It was a big deal. Created in Babylon something like 4,000 years ago. Basically, it was the rule book for society.
Yeah.
And yeah, some of it might seem harsh by today's standards, very much an eye for an eye kind of thing. But it was a big step towards having a legal system that was structured, that made sense, covered everything from who owned what to family stuff. It was all about settling arguments and keeping things stable.
So we've got agriculture, cities, writing, laws. Wow, it's amazing how these early societies were already laying the groundwork for everything we know today.
They were. And as trade kept growing, they ran into another problem, the limits of bartering. Imagine trying to run a complex economy just by swapping stuff.
Yeah, trading chickens for pottery can only get you so far. So how'd they solve that?
Well, they invented money. But here's the thing. Early money wasn't like coins or bills. One of the first forms was actually salt.
Wait, seriously, salt?
Yep. Back then, salt was super valuable, used for like preserving food, making things taste good, all sorts of stuff. The word salary actually comes from the Latin word for salt.
Get out of here.
It's true. Roman soldiers sometimes got paid in salt.
Huh. Makes my paycheck look pretty good.
Yeah.
But okay, so salt was the first money, but they eventually switched to something, well, a little more practical, right?
Yeah, metal. Ingots, particularly gold and silver, became a more standardized currency. They were easier to move around and store.
Right. Makes sense. So we've gone from fire and farming to cities, writing, laws, and even money. It's just amazing to see how it all connects.
It is.
What's next on our journey through history?
Okay, next up, let's jump ahead a bit, like all the way to the 15th century. This is where we hit the invention that honestly changed how we share knowledge forever. The printing press.
The printing press. Man, I remember learning about Gutenberg back in school. Before him, books were like these super rare, expensive things that monks had to copy out by hand, right?
Exactly. Imagine a world where only rich and powerful people had access to books. Gutenberg flipped the script on that.
Yeah.
Big time.
But how did this printing press actually work? It sounds like a pretty big deal, but what made it so revolutionary?
It was genius, really. Gutenberg used movable type, which basically means individual letters made of metal that could be rearranged and used over and over again. You could make different pages super fast.
So it's not just making books, it's making them faster and cheaper, right?
Exactly. And that changed everything. The article talks about like the Protestant Reformation, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment. All these huge movements were fueled by the fact that knowledge was suddenly spreading like wildfire thanks to the printing press.
It's crazy to think one invention could have such a big impact. It's like a domino effect,
Yeah.
you know? One thing leads to another, and suddenly the world is totally different.
I know.
Okay, so speaking of things that change the world, but maybe don't get as much attention, let's talk about how we measure time. Seems kind of basic, but accurate timekeeping is essential for, like, pretty much everything we do, right?
Oh, yeah. We take it for granted now, but imagine trying to organize our lives without clocks or calendars.
It would be a mess.
Total chaos. But it wasn't always like this. Way back when, people had to rely on the sun and stars, things like sundials, super basic ways of tracking time. But those were like totally unreliable, especially if it was cloudy or nighttime.
Yeah.
And think about it. Different cultures probably had completely different ways of keeping time.
Right.
So when people started traveling more and interacting over longer distances, it must have been super confusing.
Yeah, it must have been a nightmare.
As societies got bigger and trade expanded, they needed a better way to measure time, something more accurate, more universal.
So when did we go from sundials to something more, sophisticated?
The first mechanical clocks showed up in Europe around the 14th century. Game changer. These clocks were often put in church towers so everyone could see them. They became like a central part of life.
Wow.
Yeah, suddenly time was something you could measure precisely. You could divide it up, schedule things.
I bet that had a huge impact on how people lived their lives, even how they thought about time itself.
For sure. It led to a more structured society where you could make appointments, plan your workday, organize events, all with a level of precision that was never possible before.
Okay, so we've gone from sundials to mechanical clocks. It's incredible how something as simple as being able to measure time accurately can change so much about society and culture.
Yeah.
And speaking of big changes, the steam engine, now that was a real turning point, right? It basically kicked off the whole Industrial Revolution.
Oh, absolutely. The steam engine was a massive achievement. Being able to use steam to power machines was huge for manufacturing, transportation, just about everything, really.
But the steam engine didn't just appear out of nowhere,
Yeah.
right? There was a lot of trial and error, a lot of tinkering before it became this world-changing force.
Right. It wasn't like someone just snapped their fingers and bam, steam engine.
Right.
Those early versions were pretty rough, not very efficient, broke down a lot. But over time, inventors like James Watt figured out how to make them stronger and more reliable.
Yeah.
They really improved on the design.
And of course, one of those famous uses of the steam engine was in locomotives, those first steam-powered trains. I bet that was like magic to people back then.
It really was. Can you imagine seeing this huge, powerful machine moving on iron rails, carrying people and goods faster than ever before? It was a revolution in transportation.
The article talks about how trains changed how we traded, made cities grow even faster, even impacted how wars were fought. Pretty hard to overstate how important they were.
You're right. The steam engine and the locomotive, they're prime examples of how new technologies can completely reshape societies.
From steam trains to something a little more personal.
Yeah.
The invention of the car. That had a huge impact on us too, right?
Oh, absolutely. The automobile really taps into that human desire for freedom, for being able to go where you want, when you want, that ability to travel independently at your own pace. It changed everything.
The article mentions Carl Benz and his Benz patent motor wagon, I think it was called. That's considered the first practical car with an internal combustion engine.
Yeah. Benz's invention was a big deal, but it was Henry Ford who made cars affordable for regular people with his Model T. Oh, and his assembly line production method. Revolutionary.
It's amazing how cars have shaped our cities, our roads, even our culture. We have so much freedom to explore and connect, but it also comes with problems, right? Like traffic jams, pollution, all that.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even the most amazing inventions come with trade-offs, you know? They change things, but not always in perfect
Good
ways.
point. Okay, so we've talked about pushing the boundaries of land travel, but humans have always dreamed of flying. And finally, with the invention of the airplane, that dream became a reality.
The airplane is a perfect example of human ingenuity, of never giving up. People spent centuries dreaming of flying, and finally, in the early 1900s, it happened.
The Wright brothers. Their first flight in 1903, that's the big one, right?
It was a huge achievement, for sure. But it's important to remember that other people were working on flying at the same time, too. Like Alberto Santos Dumont in Europe. He was making big strides, too.
So it wasn't just one single eureka moment, more like a bunch of people pushing the boundaries at the same time.
Exactly. And from those early kind of wobbly flights, aviation has come so far. We've gone from those rickety biplanes to giant jumbo jets, from propellers to jet engines, from just crossing countries to like going to the moon.
It's mind-blowing how far we've come. The airplane has shrunk the world. It connects people and cultures in ways we could never have imagined before. But it also brings up new questions, right? Like, how do we balance this amazing technology with its impact on the environment?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Okay, we've covered a lot today, from fire and agriculture to writing, the printing press, timekeeping, the steam engine, cars, airplanes. What a journey. But hold on, there's one more big shift in human history we need to talk about. Okay, so we've gone from controlling fire all the way to airplanes. Pretty amazing, right? But there's another step in this whole story of human innovation. It takes us back to, like, the very beginning of civilization.
You're talking about that shift from being nomads, hunter-gatherers, to settling down and farming?
Right, we talked about it a little earlier, but it's so important it's worth digging in a bit more. The article calls it the Neolithic Revolution. And man, it really was a revolution. What made this change so huge?
Well, think about it. For most of human history, we were wanderers, always on the move, following the food, adapting to the environment. And then, boom, agriculture happens and everything changes. We could stay in one place, grow our own food, store extra for later.
It must have been a massive shift, not just how people lived, but like their whole worldview.
Totally. Developing agriculture had these huge ripple effects on society, culture, everything. People started living in permanent settlements, villages popped up, and then eventually cities. The population could grow, and people could start specializing in different jobs.
And it's interesting to think about how it changed our relationship with nature. We weren't just taking what nature gave us anymore. We were shaping it, controlling it.
Absolutely. That change in thinking had a huge impact on everything. How we understood time and seasons, the kind of tools and technologies we developed, it all goes back to that shift to agriculture.
Speaking of tools, the article mentions domesticating animals as a key part of this revolution.
Oh yeah, domestication was huge. First dogs, then livestock. It changed the game completely. Animals weren't just food anymore, they provided labor, transportation, even companionship.
I'm a big dog person, so I love that dogs were probably the first animals we domesticated. It's amazing how long we've had that bond.
It really is. And that bond played a huge role in shaping civilization.
So we've got agriculture, settled communities, domesticated animals. All these things set the stage for the first civilizations to emerge.
And with those civilizations came new challenges. The article talks about how they needed better systems for like governing, enforcing laws, trading. It all got more complex.
That makes sense. When you've got more people in bigger cities, you need ways to manage everything.
Yeah. Right. And that's where we see things like writing systems, legal codes, eventually currency, all stuff we've been talking about in this deep dive.
It's amazing how it all connects. These early innovations, all spurred by the shift to agriculture, they really laid the foundation for everything we have today.
Totally. It's like this reminder that human progress is this long chain of discoveries, each one building on the one before it.
It really makes you appreciate how clever and resilient our ancestors were. They faced so many challenges, but they kept innovating, finding solutions, pushing the limits of what was possible.
And that's what makes this whole journey through the history of innovation so inspiring. It's about our creativity, our adaptability, our drive to keep moving forward.
This has been a really incredible deep dive.
I agree.
We've covered so much, from those first steps out of the caves to flying through the air.
It's amazing to think about.
To everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this adventure through time. We hope you've enjoyed exploring these amazing milestones, and maybe you've come away with a new appreciation for the power of human innovation.
And remember, the story doesn't end here. Innovation never stops. Who knows what incredible breakthroughs are still to come?
So keep exploring, keep learning, keep asking questions. You might be the one to make the next big leap forward. That's it for this deep dive. See you next time.